What I wanted to do today is run a webinar on 5 simple steps to protect your medical practice from a cyber attack, because it's such a scary thing right now. We've had the Optus breach, we've had the Bank breach, and we know it's happening, and we want to try and get ahead of it. And hi to Roxanne from Werribee. Thanks for corresponding with me. I'm very excited that you're all here today. So in the next 30 minutes, what I'm hoping to do is get through this in 30 minutes. I've added a whole lot more slides to this because I want you guys to leave with some great takeaways. So I'm going to speed through, but in the next 30 minutes, you're going to learn 5 simple steps to protect your medical practice from a cyber attack, so you can stop worrying about what might happen if your medical practice becomes a victim. So my promise to you is that you'll be on the front foot in understanding the steps that you need to take by the end of this webinar, so that your practice will be prepared in the event of a cyber attack. And even my big wish is that you'll have some ideas about how to prevent that from happening in the first place. Who am I? My name's Sarah Bartholomews. I'm the principal of a law firm called Legal. We help doctors protect their practice, their profits, and their people, most importantly. So I come from a medical family, which is where my passion for protecting doctors comes from. And I've written a book. It's here on my bookshelf, called Growing a Medical Practice from Frustration to a High-Performance Business. And you can find that on my website if you don't have a copy already, because it'll help with protecting your practice in lots of different ways. All right, discovering the 5-step compliance protocol. I've put together 5 steps that you need to follow in order to protect your practice. You must take these to make sure that your practice is protected from a cyber attack. So the first one is to create a patient-centric practice. Patients do feel when they're the center of your practice, and it's not something else that's at the center. Sometimes it could be serving your doctors. Sometimes it could be making enough money to keep the doors open. Hopefully, if you put your patients at the center of your practice, all of those things take care of themselves. You want them to show up. You don't want no-shows. You want them to do the work on their health so that when the doctor suggests to do something, they do it. And you want them to keep coming back and to recommend the practice to their friends and colleagues. This is what helps you grow your practice. Spend your time thinking about what they need and what sort of people are they? Who do you want to be attracting, and who is your ideal patient, so that you can build a practice around taking care of people you really care about, which is what I'm so blessed to do here at Legal. We care about health, we care about doctors, and we care about protecting them from horrible things going wrong in their practice. And having had a colleague recently, a dentist, have this happen and everything gets shut out, and they've got people turning up for appointments and they don't know any details about what they're there for because they didn't pay the ransom. So we'll get more onto that in a little bit, but that's what drives me, and finding what drives you and your practice is really very important to creating a safe space. Review information and security processes is the second step. So this is not a small step. And if you've outsourced your IT, it's a really good list to go through with your outsourced IT team. So disaster recovery planning, as I mentioned before, the dentist who had people turning up for procedures and didn't know, like, what would happen if we did have a cyber attack and we lost all of that information? Do we have backups anywhere? What is our plan? Because you don't want people coming to work with nothing to do either, or you don't want to be negotiating with someone on the dark web to not release your patient files, because you don't want to create an issue in the industry that already exists, but a further issue in relation to those criminals being empowered to do more of what they're already doing. Training for your team on email hacking is really good investment. I've recently done it at ULegal, and we did have one of our lawyers click on a suspect link. The email was incredibly well done. It was through our Microsoft system. They have test ones they can send you, and then they send any employees that click on the link to a 15-minute training about phishing emails, because sometimes those links can be clicked on and then the criminals get access to your whole system, which is what can cause the initial breach. It's often through people in your team clicking on a link that they shouldn't be. So email training is right up there on the list of how to protect your practice. Multi-factor authentication where you can. So if you run through Xero, it might be a Xero account that you want to have two-factor authentication. I have it on my practice management software. I have it on all my social media accounts because I don't want anyone getting access to my client information through any means. So two-factor authentication or multi-factor authentication when you can is a really good way to help protect you and your practice. And then password management. Of course, a lot of people just use the same password for everything and don't update them. We use LastPass, which is a password manager, and if you really want to be protected, where you can use longer passwords, they should be randomized letters and numbers, and a password manager gives you the opportunity to update those quite regularly, where you might not feel like doing that if you are having to remember them all, which is just a nightmare. So they're my top 4, and they are significant, but if you start implementing something you hadn't before, you will be so much better off than you were without those things in place. Update your privacy policy. So making sure you've got an up-to-date privacy policy that is future focused. We find that a lot of practices don't have privacy policies. I'm not sure how. They're not on their website. They must have them somewhere because they need them for their accreditation. So they must have them somewhere, but they're not on their website. It's always a good opportunity to update them and to focus on, we say, current and future employers and employees, and also your future and present patients as well. So thinking about how to prepare that privacy policy so that it has an ongoing life, and updating it as needed. Make sure it reflects your operations. It's not something that you've pulled from another website, and talking to your team about it, training them on privacy policies and procedures as well. We do suggest making it readable and not legal jargon where you can avoid it. It does have to fit the Australian privacy principles, but focusing on the essentials, not putting too much in there, is definitely something that we recommend. Quick recap. So the first 3 steps are, the first step is to create a patient-centric practice. The second is for you to review your information and security processes. And the third one is to update your privacy policy if it hasn't been updated for some time. Step 4, this is where I've added the extra slides. So empower your team. You don't want to have to do this all on your own. You have a team and you need to empower them to make your practice the safest that it can be. So patient-focused medical practitioners that empower their teams to assist with compliance are significantly more fulfilled. They're not waking up at night worrying about these sorts of issues. Training to understand what to do in the event of unauthorized access. Understanding the application of the data breach notification laws. So these apply to all APP regulated businesses, which are all medical and allied health practices because you deal with such sensitive information. If there's a data breach, if there's a data breach that's likely to result in serious harm, it requires notification to the affected individuals. I know this because I was a victim of I know that companies do this because I was a victim of the Optus hack, and I got an email from them telling me I needed to get a new driver's license. So it's something that the Office of the Australian Information Commissioner takes very, very seriously. And it's something that we as business owners that deal with sensitive information need to as well. So the notification also needs to be to the Office of the Australian Information Commissioner. And it requires you as your entity to undertake a full assessment of any suspected data breaches, so that you have a process for doing that as well. Empower your team. So an eligible data breach occurs where there's been an unauthorized access, disclosure, or loss of personal information where the loss is likely to result in serious harm. So you would have seen from the Medibank hack that they assume that any health information, it can potentially result in serious harm. So something that was taken very, very seriously. If you have reasonable grounds to suspect that there may have been a data breach, you need to undertake an assessment. And that assessment must happen within 30 days. And the assessment has 3 specific stages. If you suspect, then immediately initiate an assessment, then a full investigation and evaluation. Once you've determined that there's been unauthorized access, you need to consider whether you can implement any immediate remedial action, which will prevent the risk of harm. And that might be changing passwords or making sure that you, I guess it depends on what happens. Having a backup could also help prevent further harm. And then if whatever you've done, depending on the circumstances, prevents that risk of harm, it can cease to be a notifiable data breach. You must notify all relevant persons that there's been a breach, and you must also complete the statement that I mentioned earlier. The consequences are potential civil penalties of up to $1.8 million, which for a small business is a significant penalty. For those bigger businesses, it's not as significant, which is why they're now looking at changing those to increase the penalties. To empower your team, what do you need to do? First, if you had this happen, these are the steps that I recommend you take. Get out your manual. So I'm hoping you all have a data breach manual. And then 2, call your lawyer. And then get that lawyer to call your IT provider, because lawyers have a protection called legal professional privilege, which means that if anything were to happen where there was a legal case, that call cannot be disclosed. And then also notify your insurer. You may do that directly, you may do that through a lawyer. So if you've got cyber insurance, then you'd be calling your insurer, because often they need to manage the process with you. Step 5 is to leverage a legal expert. Using an expert will bring new ideas, best practice, and accountability. And I hope that there's already new ideas in your head right now that wouldn't be there if you hadn't made time to listen to this webinar. So what I suggest the steps that you take after this webinar are to assess and update your privacy policy, Review your contracts with your key suppliers to understand how suppliers will treat information you disclose or make available to them. One thing that I've recently done is to contact our outsourced IT people and ask how they store our passwords, because outsourced IT providers are a source of huge risk to businesses, because the criminals on the dark web do target them, because they know if they get in the keys to the IT business that they can access lots of different people's data. And so if their passwords aren't secured in a password manager or some sort of similar secure arrangement, that they've got all these passwords and they can just go crazy on the IT provider's clients. So that's something that I've recently done and suggest you do. And updating your data breach plan and manual as well is a great way to help protect you, know your team's empowered, so that if something happens, like to my dentist friend, it happened right before they were about to go away for the school holidays and they had to cancel their trip. But if you've got a team that's empowered to deal with it, maybe you can be available on the telephone and not having to do everything yourself. So what does a basic data breach plan and manual look like? We suggest having a responsible person nominated, and that might be more than one person, a process for undertaking an assessment of a suspected data breach. And so that might be something that you work through to see if it's likely to cause significant harm, which I mentioned is a really important limb of the test. And then what actions need to be taken when a notifiable data breach has occurred? Do the team know what those steps are, and can they do them in conjunction with you, practice manager, whoever is responsible for this? And then also a communication strategy for notifying affected patients or staff. Thinking about where you start with that can be pretty overwhelming. And then finally, as I said, training. So training on the emails, training on the systems, training on your processes and procedures and policies for your team will help empower them and maybe hopefully make you feel like you're not so alone. So the 5 steps are to create a patient-centric practice, to review information and security processes, to update your privacy policy if it needs it, and then 5, to leverage a legal expert. So I've got a question from Alison. What is defined as serious harm, or is it subjective? The answer is yes. Lawyers always say it depends, and it does depend. It depends on the circumstances of the breach. We once had a client who left a patient file. They'd gone to visit a patient and they had a hard copy file and they left it in their car, and it was stolen out of their car. So the information that was in there was quite personal, and if it was released, we established that it could potentially do serious harm to them. If you think about the Optus breach, which I mentioned earlier, it might be that someone setting up accounts in other people's names to get finance would be considered serious harm, because they had the driver's license, Medicare details, all of those personal details that they could then apply for credit. So it is subjective, but you can sort of brainstorm the sort of things that might happen with the data that you have. And when you are collecting personal information, which telecommunication businesses always do, that risk is heightened if people can create new personalities from them. So one thing that we have available on our Fast Track Solutions is a notifiable data breach package, which we personalise for each of our clients that purchase this. Find out more about your business, and we create the documents that are set out in this fast track solution for you. And I do have some time for questions. Thank you, Tanya, for your feedback. That it was interesting. Have you got any takeaways? What are people going to do with this information now that you've got it? I remember attending a similar session and just having a page of things I needed to do, even if they were for me to understand in more detail how certain things work, because I learned about how the Optus data hack happened, and I thought, could that happen in my business? If you want to have a chat about this or anything else in your practice, you're welcome to go to our contact page, let us know when the best time to give you a call is, and we'll be in touch. So the final slide is, if you're not already in our Facebook group, You Legal for Doctors, there's over 1,000 people in there. You're very welcome to join us. We would be delighted to have you there. We put regular updates and information about the law and medical practices in there, and people also start conversations from time to time in relation to issues that they're experiencing, and it's great to have other practices share their experiences as well. So on that, we're half an hour and plus 2 minutes. Thank you so much for coming along.